Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 34th ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by Chad Ricardo of Fox 5 DC. Chad, it's great to have you on.
Matthew, it is an absolute pleasure to be on with you, brother. Thank you for thinking of me.
Yeah, of course, really appreciate you coming on. And let's get right into it. I just want to start by asking when you first knew that you wanted to work in the sports industry.
Woo! Matthew, that's an easy one, bro. I knew to be specific with you because everybody likes stories, right? When I
Yeah.
was about 7 or 8 years old, I was in around third or fourth grade, and me and my best friend at the time, shout out Jamal Batten Ridley, we used to watch Sports Center. Both of us, we'd watch Sports Center when we woke up in the morning, eating cereal, and we would watch Sports Center before we went to bed at night. And he and I decided at that point that when we grew up and got older that we would be Sports Center anchors together on TV. And so that's when I decided that it was going to be my career. But in all honesty, I always loved sports. I loved the nitty-gritty portions of sports, Matthew. I played ball, not particularly well, even though I did play in college at James Madison University. But for me, it was always about the understanding of the games. Matthew, I taught myself math through the fractions associated with the quarterback's completion percentage and or basketball players' free throw percentage. That's how I learned how to convert fractions into decimals, etc. So sports have always been a part of my blood.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that you played football at JMU. That's actually the college that I root for as well. So that's a
Really?
fun little, yeah, that's a fun little. My dad went there, so that's a fun little connection
Oh
as
man.
well. Mhm.
What do you know what year? Me and your dad, we might have been suite mates.
Not sure the exact year. I'm pretty sure 99.
Okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
graduated in
Mhm.
'03. So me and your dad, we weren't we were there around the same time. It looked the same, looks a lot different now, but it was the same when
Yeah.
me and your dad was there.
Yeah. Now, as I mentioned during the intro, you are a reporter for Fox 5 DC, which obviously means that you spend a lot of time in front of a camera. What is one tip that you use to make sure that you have good on-air presence?
Man. Oh man. Good on-air presence. I think, Matthew, that probably on-air presence is probably one of the stronger attributes that I have. Um, I'll tell you that my on-air presence, the energy that I possess, the way that I go about attacking every time that I'm on air, didn't actually start in TV, bro. It started in the fact that I have been hosting bar and bat mitzvahs for the last 16 years of my life. And it's through being a master of ceremonies in bar bat mitzvahs. That's actually where I learned. That's where I found my voice. Before I was doing bar and bat mitzvahs, I wasn't able to project to the back of the room the way that I am now. So it was in that time that I found my voice. It was in that time that I learned an ability to be able to direct and to hold a crowd's attention, and then to be able to deliver my messaging in short and concise moments there. Ever since then, coming from that background and moving into television, I don't want to say the television was easy because that's not accurate, but just from a presentation perspective, so much of that came from my back years in entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this was, transitioning over to football, this was an unbelievable season
Amen.
for the Washington Commanders, to say the least, making the NFC Championship game with a rookie, Jaden Daniels. You obviously got to cover the entire season. So, can you just break down what that opportunity was like?
Man, you want to talk about dreams come true, right? And I think that this year was a dream come true for so many individuals. Of course, you mentioned Jaden Daniels, and you can't possibly tell this story without beginning with JD5 and what it is that he meant to this community. This is a community that, of course, many individuals within the Washington Commanders, the Washington football team, fan base and lovers of the team loved Doug Williams. They had belief when an RG5 first came on the scene. So to have Jaden Daniels as kind of being the manifestation of that next step in the process, his drafting alone meant a lot to this team. But Matthew, I tell people all the time, as great as Jaden is, the true foundation of this team is in the leadership and the structure. You look at a Josh Harris who comes over here and helps to immediately eradicate many of the bad feelings that this fan base had felt for the last 20 to 25 years. And then he brings in the right people. He brings in an Adam Peters who had experience working with Bill Belichick out there in New England. Adam Peters, who helped to put together the San Francisco 49ers team, one of the best rosters within the league. You bring in Adam Peters, who is dedicated to finding a coach that he could work in tandem with, and that being Dan Quinn, when so many individuals in the area were looking for Johnson from Detroit, looking for Slowick from the Texans, these boy wonder offensive coordinators. Adam Peters said, I'm going to go get me a leader of men, someone who can instill culture. And that's what those two individuals did. They brought in a great coaching staff. They made the right choices in terms of free agency to build that roster. And so I say all of these things to say that the foundation of this team was built properly, and it is that foundation with the addition of the magic of Jaden Daniels that allowed for this team to go on a magical run that was great on the football field, but even better for this community and this fan base that had been starving for a winner for some 25 to 30 years.
Yeah, now one of the obviously best moments of the season came when Washington beat Chicago on that Hail Mary earlier this season. During that final play, we all lost hope at that point. You were in the middle of interviewing someone who said, "I feel as though we won," which obviously ended up becoming a reality just a few seconds later. What was that experience like?
It's a viral moment, bro. It was a viral moment. I'll tell you. I'll take you kind of behind the curtains of when you are doing this for your profession. So we at Fox 5, we were dedicated to telling the story of this season through the eyes of the fans, and using their voices to tell the stories. Any station can go, and this is no disrespect to any other station, but any station can go and get the interviews from the athletes at the podium after the game. Like, that's, everybody has that access. And Matthew, if most individuals want to hear what Dan Quinn said after the game, they'll go to Sports Center and they'll get that. But we here as a local, in DMV is a very large space, but we're still a local. As a local station, we have an opportunity to truly tap into the fan base. So we get sound from the people as games end. I'm Matthew, because just like you said, I'm thinking the game is over. Chicago goes down and score. There's 30 some odd seconds. I'm thinking the game is over. So I'm really just trying to get a head start on the work that I need to do. So I'm interviewing people. How does this feel? Heartbreak City, et cetera, et cetera. And then that play happens. And as you can see in that viral moment that was picked up by, the NFL and everyone else, I didn't even know what was happening when the reaction of the fans came. And so that created the viral moment. We may win an Emmy off of that, but I'll tell you that the key thing, again, from a work perspective, is I understood what had just happened. I understood the Hail Mary, obviously, but I understood that we had captured the true essence of what the people felt in real time the second that it happened. And that's different than having a big crowd shot of everybody cheering. We had captured in the faces of how people felt the moment that it happened. So I told my photojournalist in the moment, I was like, hey, did you get that? Did you stay rolling? Because if you did, that's going to be a big thing. And fortunately it was. But again, it's not about me. It's about the fact that we captured that moment for the fans. And that's something that the Commanders and this fan base will be able to have forever.
Yeah, and obviously your Twitter X bio says "man of the people," so it's great that you are able to build those connections with fans, obviously. Now, the Commanders are coming off, the 55-23 loss against the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship game. What were your
Yes.
main takeaways from that matchup?
Takeaway number one, and this is not me being a homer. The final score, that game was not indicative of what the
Yeah.
final score was. I mean, the Eagles the Eagles ran away in the fourth quarter of that game in the same way that they did in the, I believe, Week 10 matchup with the Commanders as well. I mean, those are two games in which the Commanders played the Eagles close for 3 games, and then in the fourth quarter, they got the better of them. The Eagles, better team. Matthew, they're the better team. In fact, they may, at least on paper, be the most complete team in all of the NFL. You've got a top 3 defense, I believe. You had a top 5 offense with arguably the best single football player in the NFL in a Saquon Barkley out there with a balanced offense, a great offensive line. They're a better team. The Commanders had to play a perfect game in order to win that game in Philadelphia. 3 turnovers, 2 of them really got past 2 of those turnovers because Matthew, going down on Austin Eckler's fumble, and Austin Eckler was great to this team, not only on the field, but from a leadership perspective. But on that final fumble, you're looking at the Commanders going down and likely getting points on that possession. That would have gotten it back down to a 1-possession game heading into the fourth quarter. And if you tell me that Jaden Daniels and this team is going to be in a 1-possession game in the fourth quarter, I'm still putting all of my money on the Commanders. But that's not what happened. Austin Eckler fumbles, and I think that took the air out of the team totally because they kind of had that sense that maybe it wasn't the Commanders' day. And again, the Eagles, Saquon Barkley and crew, they pull away in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, the fumbles and
Yeah.
turnovers in general were obviously the story of that game. Washington kind of killed themselves with all those turnovers. And before that NFC Championship game, you got to talk with both Commanders and Eagles fans. What was it like seeing those two extremely passionate fan bases clash before one of the biggest games of the year?
Look, you hit the nail on the head, bro. Eagles fans have a reputation about themselves, and that's not just what Washingtonians feel. That is the reputation that they have across the nation. You know, I mean, for goodness sakes, they've thrown snowballs at Santa Claus. We saw a couple of weeks ago, not to besmirch again their fan base, but we saw a couple of weeks ago the way that one of their fans treated a young lady in the stands there as well. But I will tell you that I had the opportunity to go to Philadelphia twice this year. And for me, my experience, they treated me lovely. They were a wonderful, passionate, extraordinarily passionate, but a wonderful crowd that was always willing to participate in my active live shots and to engage and to treat me with hospitality. So I thank them for the way that they treated me. And so to be able to go there with that energy, Matthew, and I'm talking about packed stands. There were people there. We arrived on site at, I believe, 8:30, and that parking lot was full of fans already at 8:30 in the morning for a 3 o'clock kickoff. They were pumped up. They were ready to go. And so to have our loyal fan base who came up by the droves, by the busloads, literally, to have them right side by side with these passionate Eagles fans, there was another viral moment that took off as they were all expressing their displeasure for the Dallas Cowboys. But it was amazing to be able to bring those two passionate fan bases together for a moment of trash talking unity in the face of what was about to be the biggest game of the year for both of those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna bring up the "we suck" or Dallas sucks chants. Obviously, just a really funny moment between
Yeah,
2 teams that don't necessarily like each other. And,
that's right.
1 week ago, it was announced that Cliff Kingsbury will be staying in Washington as their offensive coordinator rather than potentially getting a head coaching position with another team, obviously with a lot more money on the table as a head coach. Did this surprise you that he's gonna stay?
No, not at all. And I think that one of those reasons is just to address the business first. I'm of the belief, and I could be incorrect in this, but I'm of the belief that Kingsbury may still be receiving a bit of a payout from Arizona when he
Yeah.
was the head coach there. Yeah, double check me on that.
Yeah,
In
he
addition
yeah.
to the funding for being the offensive coordinator with the Washington Commanders, and then secondly, bro, you got to look at it. If you don't have, and I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to any other franchise. If you're looking at the New Orleans Saints job,
Yeah.
Do you want to go to New Orleans where you've got a retread quarterback in a Derek Carr? You don't really have a ton of stock on the shelf, nor do you have very much in cap space coming into this year. That's an organization that's won a Super Bowl. They've got great ownership, great leadership from what I've seen, but from what's on the shelf there, there's not much there. Do you want to go to New Orleans? Do you want to go to Jacksonville, who does have Trevor Lawrence, but that's a team, that's an organization that has not proven to be able to get it together? You want to go to one of those two places, or you want to spend another year or two with Jaden Daniels? With Jaden Daniels, who you have created absolute magic with this year, because all you're doing is raising your stock up for when the right job comes along, so that your next head coaching opportunity is one that you truly value, not one that you take just because something's open.
Yeah, I mean, you said that perfectly. If he did go to another team, I think it's all money based, and
Yeah,
I do believe that Arizona, is still paying him actually, and
yeah,
I mean, like, he's gonna hate his situation if he goes to New Orleans, as you mentioned, if he goes to Jacksonville. So, I mean, that comes down to, do I wanna potentially get more money, obviously, or stay with the team that I just started with, kinda have developed, obviously, and is in a better situation. He ended up choosing that second option. And during
yeah.
this past postseason, Diami Brown averaged 76 receiving yards per game, including a receiving touchdown against the Buccaneers in the wild card round. And I mean, I say that there were also some struggles. He had 2 fumbles, obviously,
Yeah,
one
tough.
against Philly, one against Detroit, and then he also had some drops. And throughout Brown's first 4 seasons in the league, he has less than 800 combined receiving yards and just 4 total touchdowns, with Brown being a free agent this offseason. Do you think he showed enough in the playoffs to potentially have Washington re-sign him?
Man, Matthew, you are asking the tough questions now, brother. You are asking the tough questions. Listen, man, De'Ami Brown coming into this year, with all due respect to Diami, it would not be far fetched to say that coming into this year, his career had been a bit of a letdown. It would not be far fetched to say that at all. I think that this year he showed flashes. I think that this year he showed reasons why he adds value, albeit to the Washington Commanders next year, for to whoever else he signs a contract for. I think that he showed reasons why. He's shown an ability to get downfield. He's shown an ability to make big plays. In this playoff run, he showed an ability to make tough catches as well as get downfield. I mean, that Detroit game, he was on fire. You just gave his stats there. Not only him, but OZ, and you may be coming to
Yeah.
OZ in a moment here, but Zacchaeus showed many of the same traits as well. I do believe that wide receiver 2 will be a position in which the Washington Commanders look to upgrade this
Mhm.
offseason. One of the key things, one of the key pieces, and we heard from Josh Harris just on Monday, is that they're going to add the right pieces. And wide receiver is one of those positions in which you don't want to bring in just an ego guy who says, give me the ball, give me the ball. So I do believe that this organization is going to add the right pieces. De'Ami Brown showed his value. I do believe that the squad will look for a more established wide receiver too.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Brown has just in general been a pretty big disappointment. I thought he was going to be good with Sam Howell. Obviously, that UNC connection that quite clearly didn't work out. And then this season, he obviously didn't do great with Jaden Daniels either. Was pretty active in the blocking game, so I do have to give him credit there. But the best I see him being is a wide receiver 3. Now, you mentioned that wide receiver 2 position that the Commanders do need to find. Would you rather see them go after another wide receiver in free agency like a T. Higgins, or take someone in the draft, maybe Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka?
I think that if you can get in position to get a guy, and I shouldn't say a guy because that's just a guy, that's a jag, to get a dude. If you can get a dude in that first or second round, who can come in and contribute and who will be ready to contribute. And wide receivers, it used to be that wide receiver was one of the toughest positions to translate out of college into the NFL. But now it's 7-on-7, and the way that collegiate offenses throw the ball all around the field, collegiate wide receivers are coming in more prepared to contribute right away. So if you can get that dude in the first or second round, bottom end of the first or second round, and you can bring him in, then I would rather see the team go that way. But it's strictly from the reason, again, that culture meant so much to this team. Having the right guys meant so much to this team. And wide receivers, Matthew, wide receivers have a tendency of being a little diva-ish. That is a part of being a wide receiver. And so I would rather the wide receiver be someone coming out of college that you can vet and you know that they're the right character guy than one of these big name guys. Like Stephon Diggs, shout out Stephon Diggs. He's from the region. He's a DMV dude through and through. But do you want to bring someone like Stephon Diggs into this culture? I don't know that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to throw any shade, obviously, but would you consider a rookie like Malik Neighbors to be one of those guys as well?
No.
Mhm,
And I'll tell you why.
mhm,
And the reason I say no is I think that Malik had to play with a ton of dysfunction
mhm,
in New York this year. I think that that team, that franchise, that organization is in disarray. And so I believe that even because, it's easy towards the back end of the season. There were a couple of comments that Malik Neighbors made in terms of, don't ask me why this isn't happening. You got to ask Dayball,
mhm,
you know what I'm saying, this, that, the other. But that was after the wheels had completely fallen
mhm,
off. That was after, three quarterbacks started over the span of 4 weeks. That was after your third string leapfrog your second string once Daniel Jones was benched when no one on the team understood it. So I think that for Malik, I think that he came in with the right attitude. I think that the way that the season played out kind of brought them down. And Matthew, I do want to say this. One of the things that I constantly had to remind myself of, and I think that more journalists should remind themselves of, is that at the end of the day, bro, we're talking about 20, 21, 22-year-old young man.
yeah.
20, and I know that for you, like right now, that may seem like, but I remember who I was at 21, and I wouldn't have been able to manage that situation in the right way. And I would have popped off a few times and said some things that I shouldn't have said either. So I think that he's a young man who had to deal with losing big for probably the first time in his whole entire life. So I don't believe that Malik Neighbors fits into that category.
Yeah, Cooper Flag. He's 18 years old, and people have standards of him that he's supposed to be the next, NBA legend. And I mean, I understand. I don't know if Malik Neighbors, especially towards the end of the season, handled everything correctly. Making the comments, about not wanting to lose, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
get me the ball more. But it comes to a point when you play with Daniel Jones, you play with Tommy DeVito. There's not much you can really do about that. And at some point, I mean, Saquon Barkley was there too.
Saquon, yeah,
It feels like complaining's kinda the only thing you can do. Now
that's right.
switching from offense to defense, this past season, Bobby Wagner played 1,017 defensive snaps, which
Mm.
meant he was on the field during 98.8%
Woo!
of the Commanders' defensive plays. If Washington obviously, Wagner is a free agent. If Washington does decide to re-sign Wagner this offseason, is this sustainable for a 35-year-old to be utilized that much?
Sure. I don't believe that you want to utilize a 35-year-old that much. I do believe that Bobby Wagner obviously is the first ballot Hall of Famer. I will tell you a little bit of inside information. Though Bobby is a free agent at Josh Harris's closing press conference on Monday, Bobby Wagner was there. He was, from what it was that we could see from the media's perspective, he was the only player that was there, but Bobby Wagner was there. So you can read the tea leaves for whatever that may or may not mean, if not from management's perspective, at least from his perspective and his commitment to this organization. Bobby Wagner, first ballot Hall of Famer. You don't want him playing 98% of the snaps. You probably don't want him playing 98% of the snaps when he's 25, nonetheless
Yeah.
35. So you do want to add depth to that position. But if I'm amongst that leadership core, I'm definitely signing Bobby Wagner for 1 year guaranteed money, making sure that he's out there on that field because he's the glue. He's the glue not only for that defense, but for many ways, he is the true locker room leader. He is the epitome of what it means to be a commander, and you need individuals like Bobby in the locker room to help to make sure that everyone else is on that page.
Yeah, and when I said 35 years old, that's what he's going to be at the start of next season,
Yeah,
obviously. And I think people don't realize that Wagner was one of the best linebackers in the NFL this season, period.
that's right.
Despite the fact that he was 34 years old, he's still producing at a really high level. But you have to imagine that at some point there will be a slight decline, and Washington does have to be prepared for that. Now, this season, Jaden Daniels was arguably the greatest rookie quarterback in NFL
Ever.
history. Yeah, finishing with the season with 3,568 passing yards, 891 rushing yards, 31 total touchdowns, 25 in the air, 6 on the ground. Where would you say Daniels currently ranks among all active quarterbacks in the NFL right now?
Woo. Oh man, Matthew, that's a great one. I'm gonna be wrong in saying this because I'm not gonna be able to run all of the quarterbacks through my head very quickly. I do want to put a pin on that Bobby Wagner conversation.
Yeah.
You look at it, over 130 tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and again, just being the true
Mhm.
flat out leader of that team. This team is going to add bodies across that defensive line as well. And for a middle linebacker, one of the keys is that if you've got these really, really quality defensive tackles and depth across that defensive line. They'll keep the blockers off of Bobby. Bobby will be able to flow a little bit more. So maybe that age is guarded by the depth that will be on this defensive line. But now moving forward to JD5. Again, you
Yeah.
can't have a conversation about the Commanders without Jaden Daniels. Where does he rank in terms of quarterbacks in the league, period? Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts to an
Mhm.
extent. Who else, Matthew? Who else do we got there?
I mean, for me personally,
Yeah,
I think obviously Allen and Lamar are ahead of him, and then, he performed better than Mahomes this season, but 3
sure.
straight Super Bowls obviously speaks for itself. So those 3 definitely ahead of him. I'd put Jaden above Jalen Hurts right now. I think Jalen Hurts plays into his system. I think
Sure.
he has a better surrounding cast, obviously. The one other person I would definitely put I don't know about definitely put ahead of him, but definitely in that conversation is Joe Burrow.
Joe
Depends
Burrow.
how much you wanna look at the fact that the Bengals didn't even make the playoffs this year.
There we go. Hey, yeah,
Yeah.
Matthew, that is what critics of Joe Burrow would say.
Mhm.
They would say, "Hey, he's putting up these numbers, bro.
Yeah.
He's cooking, but the team's not making playoff.
Mhm.
Didn't even make the playoffs." And how many top 3 quarterbacks in a league in which 7 teams from each conference, 7 of them make the playoffs, and he couldn't be one of those 7 teams. I think that is a large demerit against the super talented Joe Burrow. But I do love Joe. I love his game. And even when you talk about Jaden Daniels, right? Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, though I don't think you can put him at their level yet.
Mhm.
I don't think he's at that table yet. If he's able to grow from where he was this year, then he'll be at that table next year because this year again it's not just the numbers. We saw CJ Stroud put up crazy numbers last year and then he had a bit of a regression this year. But what it's about with Jaden Daniels is the way that he performed in fourth quarters and in the
Mhm.
clutch.
Yeah.
And that's the type of thing that they go and they write stories about, bro. It's not just the
Mhm.
yards, it's not just the touchdowns, it's in clutch moments. Like we said earlier, Matthew, if that was a one possession game in the fourth quarter, the Commanders win. I don't know how, I don't know why, but Jaden Daniels would have willed that team to a victory. And it's that what makes me believe that despite the numbers or on top of the numbers, that he is going to be top 2, top 3, top 1 quarterback in this league.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as I mentioned, those 4, I probably would put Burrow, despite not making the playoffs, just from a talent perspective,
Sure.
if we're just ranking quarterbacks, Burrow is better than him. And then I'd probably put Daniels at 5. He's in that conversation with obviously Jordan Love, Jared Goff, but I would give him the slight edge after seeing how he did obviously in the playoffs in his first ever season. And I think if you have one word to describe Jaden Daniels, it would be poise, as you mentioned. It
Poise.
doesn't look like he's, concerned at all. He
Yeah,
he looks more calm than most veterans in maybe their 5th playoff game.
that's right.
It's unbelievable to see him out there in the playoffs, obviously. And, in this upcoming draft, 2025 NFL draft, the Commanders have the 29th overall pick in the first round. This is obviously a team that could use a lot of help in a lot of different areas despite their
Sure.
success this season. Is there a specific position you think Washington will target with this pick?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that again, when you're looking at 29, right? Obviously, it's not a top 10 pick. It's not a top 15, even top 20 pick. So I think that this team will go for value. Who is the best player on the board at 29 and in terms of where it is? I think that anytime you have someone like a Jaden Daniels, such an asset like that, I think that the first place you have to
Mhm.
look is their offensive line help
Yeah.
that we can get in here? And that offensive line played admirably. It's an offensive line led by offensive line coach Bobby Johnson. Bobby Johnson was exiled from the New York Giants after 1 year because they said that he couldn't coach. He came and helped to put together this Washington Commanders line. But Tyler Biotish played great this year. You had Lucas who was stepping up. You had Wiley who was stepping up. But it was a hodgepodge of a group. So I would not be surprised if that's not the first place that
Mhm.
this team looks. And if you can get value at that offensive line, you take it. If not, though, then again, that wide receiver too, there will be a very potent wide receiver that's available at that point. And that defensive line, you had Fowler who was able to rush the ball, but really didn't have any additional consistent pass rushers out there. I love Cleveland Farrell. I love Dorrance
Mhm.
Armstrong, but you do need another difference maker out there. And then at the cornerback position,
Yeah.
Marshawn Lattimore will come back. Do you want to move Mikey Sainristil still back inside? Do you want for Sainristil still to stay outside? That's going to be a question as well.
Yeah, I mean, the first position that you mentioned was offensive line. Obviously, you look at that Sam Cosmi
Yeah,
ACL tear. I'd be shocked to see him
yeah,
start next season. I don't really think that's even a possibility.
correct.
So, as you mentioned, offensive lineman would be great. And another place you mentioned was defensive line. And I kind of want to, look at that a little more. This was a rough year for both Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen. You mentioned you like
No,
some of the
yeah.
guys in that defensive line. Cleveland Farrell, obviously, Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler. You didn't mention those two guys, and I think there's a good point to that. This is the highest paid defensive line duo in the NFL. Extremely disappointing this year. What does the future look like for these two guys in Washington?
It's a great question, man. I had you asked me this 2 months ago, I'd have told you that there was no way that John Allen was going to be back. And we'll see whether he can. I do know that Dan Quinn, I do know that the leadership values John Allen, what he brings to the table. John Allen, along with the Terry McLaurin, these are individuals that have been stalwarts, building blocks to this franchise, and not even they weren't even building blocks. They were the blocks under the boat that kept the boat from completely sinking over the span of the last 10 years. So John Allen was a huge portion of that. He loves this team, loves the community. He's from Ashburn, so he's from the area. So I'm sure that if the two sides can find a deal that makes sense, they'd love to have John Allen back. But to the point that you made, it wasn't the season that he would have liked to have had. So I would not be surprised if John Allen is not headed for different pastures this year. Maybe the New York Giants. The Giants need defensive line help. Oftentimes, free agents end up going in within the division, I should say, because they may not have to move and they're familiar with the confines. So I wouldn't be surprised if John Allen is not gone. Deron Payne, bro. What are your thoughts on Deron Payne? Talk to me.
My first thought is that during the playoffs, he looked sort of lazy. And Actually, I don't know about just the playoffs. I take that back. I think more towards the end of the season. When we
Sure.
saw, that final game against Dallas, when we saw maybe against Atlanta, he just didn't look like he was giving 100% out there. And obviously, Jonathan Allen was dealing with that injury. That doesn't
Mhm.
take away from the fact that he wasn't good out there when he was playing. But Deron Payne doesn't really have an excuse. He
Right.
doesn't have the I was injured earlier this season. I was supposed to have a season ending injury. He just didn't look good out there, and I don't necessarily know what Washington does in terms of whether they move on from him or now, but, I would definitely be a little concerned after seeing how he performed, uh, specifically towards the end of the season.
With defensive linemen especially, schemes matter.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to speak to the defensive line scheme that was in place 2 years ago compared to what it was this season. In some defenses, defensive linemen, again, their job is not to get after it. Their job is essentially to hold their hole and to put body on the offensive lineman and to keep that wall, which allows for the linebackers to run and make tackles. And in other schemes, defensive linemen have said, hey, you go get upfield and you go get the ball. We want you to be aggressive. And so there's a possibility that coming over with Joe Witt Jr., with Dan Quinn, with their combined defense, that those defensive tackles were asked to do different things or not asked to do some of the things that they were asked to do previously. And so maybe Matthew, with another year in the system, maybe we do see more from a Deron Payne. But I do agree with you that we probably didn't get as much from him as we were anticipating this year.
Yeah, and obviously when I mentioned he looked sorta lazy, that's not
Mhm.
anything related to, like, conditioning, obviously.
Right.
There were a few instances where he sorta just gave up on the play early, and that didn't look good on his end, obviously. Now, yesterday, Commanders owner Josh Harris stated that Washington will be keeping their name rather than going back to the Redskins. 2 years ago, when Washington was in the process of picking a new name, obviously going from the Washington football team, were there any other names that you preferred over the Commanders?
I think that I was in the I loved the Red Wolves.
Mhm.
I think the Red Wolves were one of them. There was another one that referenced planes in some sort that I don't recall what it was, but I enjoyed that as well. I really enjoyed the Washington football team. I thought that I mean that really grew on me a little bit there. But Commanders is something else that Josh Harris said at his presser. Commanders have come to mean something. Commanders have come to mean something inside those facilities. It's come to mean something to that football team, to the personnel, to the type of individual, the type of football player that this team is looking for. And it actually, although there are a ton of Washington football fans from the old school who would like nothing more for the name to go back, I do believe that Commanders is beginning to mean something to this fan base and to this community. Through my opportunities to be able to tell the stories of this team through the eyes of the fans, I hear them singing Commanders. I hear them saying "Raise Hell," which is another thing that when I first heard about "Raise Hell," I was like, "That's one of the corniest things I've ever heard." But once it's been implemented, Matthew, winning changes things, bro.
Yeah, that's
Winning
I was
changes
gonna
everything.
say. Mm,
Yeah,
I mean, everything, as you mentioned, changes when you win.
yeah.
We were the laughing stock of the NFL. Whatever name we came out with, if we were a losing team, would sound dumb, and people would
Mhm.
make fun of it. But when you start hearing people say, "Hail to the Commanders,"
Right.
I mean, the fans obviously are gonna like it more if we win. Now, a name I was kinda into, um, for those old school people that did wanna keep Redskins, going back to the 1980s, 1990s offensive line, where I know
Oh,
you mentioned, the Red Wolves. Were you also a fan of the Red Hogs?
I like alliteration. So
Mhm.
anything with alliteration, I'm good with it. So yeah, I like the Red Hogs. I mean, clearly you could have kept the mascot, and the mascot would have made a little more sense to people who don't know the history of the mascot
Mhm.
as well. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, no hate towards major tutty, but I don't know if that's necessarily doing everything for me. Now, I want to go away from the Commanders right here. This was a somewhat underwhelming rookie campaign for Caleb Williams, who led the Bears
Mm,
to just a 5-12 record. I know this is all in comparison to obviously Jaden Daniels.
right.
People aren't gonna, it's all relative to how Daniels played. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because you were able to cover Williams
That's right.
before he actually, in high school, before he made it to the NFL. Do you think he'll be able to turn things around next season with Ben Johnson at the helm?
Yeah, quick correction, Matthew. I've actually been covering Caleb Williams since he was your age. I've been
Mm,
covering Caleb Williams since middle school.
wow.
Um, and from that perspective, in short, yes, I do. Caleb Williams is special. Caleb Williams is special in a different kind of way. Caleb Williams is I've been covering youth and high school sports in the DMV for the last 10 years. Caleb was amongst those initial crops that I was beginning to cover, along with the Blake Corum, who's out there with the Rams right now, or Rakim Jarrett, who's down there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Chop Robinson, who's with the Miami Dolphins right now. But had an opportunity to cover all these guys from when they were kids. But Caleb is different. And I believe that with an offensive mind such as Johnson out there, that he will be sure to put Caleb Williams in positions to be successful. We look at the comparison, and there will always be a comparison between Jaden Daniels and a Caleb Williams here. A portion. Jaden Daniels is phenomenal, but a portion of his success is the manner in which Cliff Kingsbury set him up to be successful in terms of initially giving them half of the field to read, not asking them to read the whole entire field, going play action, getting out of the pocket, in which you cut the field in half when you're making these throws and you're making these decisions. Now, later on in the year, we saw Jaden Daniels going through his full progressions and making those outstanding throws and being everything. But to start, I thought that they gave Caleb Williams too open of a playbook, and that's really hard for a rookie, especially someone who has as many desires to do special things as Caleb Williams does. I think that Johnson will pare him back a little bit, put him in more spaces to be successful right away and early in games, and that will be all of the difference to Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Williams actually had a really average rookie year. You can't expect.
Matthew, if you look at the numbers, though, Caleb
Mhm,
Williams actually, and again, you can't go by the
mhm.
numbers, but if you look at the numbers, he actually had a pretty good season here. I
Yeah.
think he
Mhm.
came close to setting Bears records all across the board.
And, as I mentioned, obviously Jaden Daniels just made him look a lot worse. Sort of the same thing with Bryce Young last year. And that's not to say Bryce Young was good. Bryce Young was
Right,
absolutely terrible. But in comparison to CJ Stroud,
right,
obviously he looked even worse.
correct.
Now, you know, that's obviously something that I did want to break down. And if you're a overall pick, you're going to be going to a bad team.
That's right.
And I know that that wasn't technically the Bears pick, it was the Panthers pick, I believe, from that
Mhm.
DJ Moore trade,
Yep,
but that doesn't take away from the fact that the Bears were not a good team,
right.
before Caleb Williams did obviously get drafted there. Now we've been recording for just over 40 minutes. I do have one final question to ask before we wrap things up. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring sports
Mm.
broadcaster and journalist like me, what would it be?
Number one, you're doing phenomenal. Let me first and foremost tell you that, Matthew, this has been uh, everything that I could have experienced or hoped for, and so much more. So, number one, you are far ahead of the curve for where aspiring sports journalists and sports broadcasters can or should be. Number two, if I gave you one piece
Mhm,
of advice, I would say that the most important things that you can do are, number one, to understand exactly who and what you want to be. Exactly. Not the position that you want to do, but exactly who and what you want to be at your core on television and or in calling games and or in interviewing. Find out what that is, define that thing, and get as sharp to that as you possibly can be. Matthew, in your life, there's going to be a ton of people who tell you to be well rounded. And if you choose to be well rounded, God bless you, be well rounded. But it's my experience that the individuals that are truly great at what they do, they stop trying to be well rounded. They find out exactly who they are, what they are, and they hone in on being sharp at who and what it is that they are. And the second thing from there is once you know who and what you are, be darn certain that you find an organization that is looking for you. Not an organization that's looking for a position, but an organization that is looking for you and is going to allow for you to be everything that you decided that you want to be. Because once you have that relationship with an organization, then you will be better than anybody else can ever be, because nobody can be a better version of you than what you can be.
Yeah, now is that kinda what happened with you and Fox 5?
Yeah, man. Yeah, it
Mhm,
is. It is.
mhm,
It really is. I have been working in sports for some 10 years now, and I think that for a long time I was once I had built my own brand. Once I started working with organizations, I was always. I mean, anyone who has seen my stuff, I'm a dynamic dude, bro. I am not. I am not your grandfather's sports reporter. I don't even consider myself a reporter. That's why my byline doesn't say reporter. And I always, when I entered an organization, I would wonder, well, how far can I go? How
mhm,
much of this can I be? What can I wear on television? Can I do this? Can I do that? When I went to Fox 5, they told me with no uncertain terms, they said, Chad, we don't want for you to attempt to be like this guy who's on at night. We don't want you to attempt to be like that guy that's on in the morning. We want you. And
mhm.
Matthew, once they told me to be myself, I said, let's do it.
Yeah, of course, really appreciate the advice and really appreciate the kind words. With that being said, can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you wanna say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
To the people are my,
Mhm,
that is what is most important to me. I actually I do, I'll close on this. I wear 5 chains, Matthew, again just being me, but I wear this number 5, and a lot of people think that I wear this number 5 for Jaden Daniels. I do not, although I love Jaden Daniels. He's an outstanding, amazing young man. I wear this number 5 to remind me of the 5 things that are the most important to me in life. Number one, that is my beautiful wife and my son. Not only because they are my beautiful wife and my son, but because they make a ton of sacrifices. Like right now, as my wife is upstairs cooking dinner and taking care of our son, they make sacrifices that allow for me to be able to do what it is that I love. So that's number one. Number two, to my mother, always all respect to the individuals who bring you into the world. To my mother, who doesn't even live here but
mhm,
watches every single hit that I do on television through our streaming platform and gets very upset when she misses me even for 90 seconds at any point in time during the day. Number three, to my own personal desire to be great, Matthew, because I don't have a desire to be good. I don't have a desire to just make it. My desire is to be great. And I push myself towards that every day. That's number three. Number four is to Fox 5, the organization that is again providing me with this platform to be able to be impactful. But number five, Matthew, is to the people. I
mhm.
love the people. I love the community. I grew up in this game, again, covering youth and high school sports, building these relationships one-on-one with the parents. So now what I do now is just that on a larger scale, at a larger level. It's been a blessing to be able to communicate, to connect, and to be a voice of the people of the DMV. So that are my closing words.
Yeah, and absolutely. Speaking of the people, where can they find some of your work if they wanna check it out?
Yeah, you can find me everywhere. Chad Ricardo, search any platforms and you can find me there. Twitter, Instagram at Real Chad Ricardo. Of course, you can find me on television on Fox 5, streaming on Fox Local. Search Fox 5 online. What is it? Fox5DC.com. LinkedIn, Chad Ricardo. Just Google Chad Ricardo and you will find me.
Again, big thanks to Chad Ricardo for being the 34th ever Highlight Haven interview guest, and as always, we will see you next time.